on the paper, but this is actually really technical. So put the pen down, stand up, and start doing something right. That's awesome. And I'm going to give you what are your best tips to use a pocketbook, and what else would you like me to add to the conversation? Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you like the video, click the like button, subscribe, and for more written content, photos, reviews, you can check out writing.com or follow me. Hi everyone, and welcome to Writing Guide. So a small topic to end the last week of January 2024 are 10 questions to reflect your productivity. So I think it's always beneficial for us to look back on what have we been doing well and things we haven't done as good as we think we have. So your productivity is a key factor in achieving success and personal satisfaction. It is important to Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing Guide. To follow up with the previous video, here are a few more things I've learned after studying more than 7 years with the Fountain hobby. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing Guide. Journaling has long been recognized. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing Guide. As we delve into the future, the evolution of fountains holds fascinating possibilities. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing Guide. As we delve into the future, the evolution of fountains holds fascinating possibilities. Advancement in materials, designs, and in technology promise to elevate these writing instruments, blending tradition with innovation. I think the future may unveil pens that seamlessly bridge the analog and digital world, offering a harmonious balance between classic craftsmanship and modern functionality. Before we continue, please click the like button and subscribe. And if you are looking to purchase your next fountains, notebooks, and inks, please check out my shop on Instagram or check out Patreon for exclusive content. Thank you. Humankind is really weird in a way, but for whatever task we want to complete, we tend to develop and create tools to make that task a lot easier, more pleasant, and less effort-driven. For an axe to be able to chop wood well, we have developed a whole system of mineral gathering, alloy creating, forging, and techniques teaching, so that the people who still chop wood today can do just that with the least amount of effort and in the safest way possible. When all that is done, we get crazy at it and start making that axe into something tomorrow, an object of perfected engineering and finishing, so that it would not just be a tool, but also a collectible item that is worth a lot more than just meets the eye. That whole tangent aside, I think it's going to be the path that our beloved writing instrument, the fountain, is going towards in the years to come. If you are following the trends of fountain world, you can see that trends come and go from time to time, and there's not much of a huge difference between pens from the last decades and the pens that are released in recent years. There are plenty of reasons for such a slow development rate, but in general, the fountain has lost its place as the number one means of communication and note-taking of our current generation. However, it isn't to say that there's no use for such an instrument for the modern day, and the constant stimulus from the internet has created a wave of people who would like to have a clear separation from all the information and the true form of thinking that our brains wish to have. Having no sorts of outside stimulant and dopamine hits from the constant spamming triggers, it does bring up the benefit of a writing tool being a memorabilia to remind you that you don't have to glue your eyes to a phone screen most of the time, and there's a whole new world out there that you can experience with your real senses. And you can always look at the possibilities that blank page possesses. The opposite side does bring something to our consideration as well. How do we actually combine technology with the means of writing that is so instinctual to define motions of our fingers and hands? In recent years, we have seen attempts at making technology of smart pens and smart paper created to sort of digitalize the written articles and drawings of your creation. They are good attempts. Nonetheless, there is still much to go, and the idea of creating a more limited device could prove such usefulness in the traditional sense as the other currently available devices such as a tablet could prove to be too powerful for young learners who have yet to learn how to control their purchase in class. The idea of adding more state-of-the-art materials and 3D printing into the fountain world could be something to consider as well. In the past, we have seen countless fountains made with a silhouette of a stick and a tip that can draw out a dark line ink. However, we turned that into some never seen before shape that conformed to the shape of individuals' hands or an extension to help those with disabilities to be able to enjoy the fun of using a writing instrument. The environment is there, and even though for now there seems to not be too many paths for the development of fountains, I can still see where we can break through, and the things that we were least expecting, such as the weight balance of a fountain, can now be adjusted with parts in the pen itself, such as with the mechanism of the Fuseo Cardi. At the end of the day, the fountain is basically a stick with a point. And there could only be so many things we could do to change the shape and feel of such parts. We have gone a long way, and there could be another longer path to follow. Innovations do not happen overnight, and many refinements combined can be turned into a new innovation that is so different that we couldn't recognize its path right now. What do you guys think? What will the fountains look like in 10, 20 years from now? And what do you prefer we do with the fountains for the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing Guide. To follow up with the previous video, here are a few more things I've learned after studying more than 7 years with the fountain hobby. I hope this is helpful, and let me know what else I should add to this topic. Once again, all the links are in the description, and if you're looking to buy your next fountain, you know where to look, and now let's get right into it. The first thing that is usually collected, that is paper and ink, get you the largest returns on your investment. Most fountain beginners tend to invest quite heavily on their first few pens, while neglecting the other aspects of the hobby, consumables such as inks and paper, or accessories such as cases and tools. After the first 2 or 3 pen purchases, the largest return on investment I found to be with inks and paper, and specifically good quality paper. Your typical Template and Rhodia pads are good daily carry, as you can just plow through many of them without ever thinking of the cost, but once in a while, a splurge with a high quality Midori or Tomoe paper notebooks can bring new life into your fountain hobby. Different inks react differently to various types of paper, and depending on the quality of paper, different qualities of ink can be brought out as well. With inks, a more lubricated ink can be the savior of the writing experience of fine nibs, while a drier ink can help making a raw nib easier to use on a daily basis. Trying out different types of inks can really improve how your fountain writes. If you have a fine nib, using ink that flows smoothly can make the writing feel easier and smoother. On the other hand, if you are using a broad nib, inks that doesn't flow too fast can make it easier to write neatly every day. By trying different inks, you can find the ones that works best for you and makes writing with your fountain more enjoyable. Well, this is really my personal opinion, but there are only 2 price points for fountains: either $35 or below, or $150 and above. Most fountains available on the market is intended for a younger audience who are still in school with writing needs, and because of that, the majority of products are priced at $35 and below. There's still improvements into quality of fountains in this mid-range. However, the changes are less noticeable, so you can start saving for those really solid pens at the upper price range. For the typical fountain users that just started out, they have a tendency to want to try out as many pens as possible. Of course, there is differences between models in the starter price range, yet the fit and finish might not be significantly improved, and there is little to none resale value to these pens. If we think about this from the financial perspective, we can safely say that it is better to combine the cost of the little ones into one high-quality writing instrument that can last way longer and can provide you with more enjoyment out of it. Moreover, with a higher price point, we can start
It's a very strange question, but I find it difficult to come up with ways to actually use my fountain pens. It's a very strange question, but I find it difficult to come up with ways to actually use my fountain pens on a regular basis. I'm not a student, so I don't take notes during the day. I tend to keep a journal, but I found I just couldn't come up with things to write about. I'm just a normal guy with a normal job who loves fountain pens. That's cool, man. I keep a journal, and a pen journal, but only to use my load up anyway, writing a pen. If possible, can you give me any tips on ways to actually put my pens to use, such as different types of journals, etc. I'll do good and good work. Well, thank you very much. We'll get started today. I got some cool ideas for you. I want to your question early on, so I definitely find it to it. So it's cool to do an intro. What's the best way to store pens on my desk? Is it okay to keep them vertically up or horizontal? I haven't addressed this in previous videos, but I know it tends to kind of vary. So check out my video, Fountain 101, Storing Your Fountains. That will pretty much address everything here. quick summary, there is no necessarily right or wrong answer about how you store your pens. Me personally, I store most of mine horizontal. Basically storing the bucket, dryer, so horizontal, and kind of middle, and storing it down to the letter. So depending on the particular pen you're using, whether it tends to have trouble starting, you want to keep it down. If you find it really wet, you want to keep it up. Or just kind of middle of the road. I keep all mine in like leather cases that I store horizontally, and I find that is fine for pretty common pens. So really kind of preference, really fine for this for you. Here's my question. If I let an ink dry on a pen, how can I clean the pen to ensure there isn't any dry ink left? I let mine sit for a couple months. It's a strange question, but I find it difficult to come up with ways to actually use my fountain pens on a regular basis. I'm not a student, so I don't take notes during the day. I tend to keep a journal, but I found I just couldn't come up with things to write about. I was a normal guy with a normal job who loves fountain pens. That's cool, man. I do keep an ink journal, and a pen journal, but only use my load up and when I pen. If possible, give me any tips on ways to actually put pens to use, such as different types of journals, etc. I love what you're doing with good pens and good great work. Well, thank you very much. Don't get discouraged, okay? I got some cool ideas for you. I wanted to put your question early on, so I do definitely have time to get to it. So it's cool what you're doing in an ink journal. That's definitely one thing that you can do. That's awesome. If you like to do any kind of drawing or sketching, that's really fun, especially if you get like a flex pen or anything with italic, a different kind of nib, that can be really fun. If you're not into drawing and you really want to stick to writing, transcribing can be a good way to get to use your pens, and it can also be kind of a therapeutic thing. So from a religious standpoint, if you have any scripture or any, that type of writing, you can always transcribe that stuff. If you have any inspiring quotes, like any motivational type stuff or, founding fathers type things, if you want to, transcribe any famous letters or maybe documents like the Constitution or anything like that that kind of motivates you, that can be really cool too. And not only are you using your pens and getting some good practice in, but you can also kind of, stimulate your mind at the same time as to whatever you're transcribing. So that's kind of neat. You can do correspondence, write a love letter to somebody that you haven't written a letter to in a really long time, or just write a letter to a really good friend telling them, what's going on lately. Or, so you can kind of take it to another level from just journaling and keeping it personal. If you write a letter to somebody, you'd be amazed sometimes what kind of reaction you can get just because people don't really do that anymore. It's really kind of neat. You can do pen reviews. If you're inclined in that way, if you have any photographic skills or if you have any video skills, a good example is Stephen Brown on YouTube. He started out just as an enthusiast and shot a couple of videos just with some pens that he had laying around. And as it turns out, he really enjoyed doing it. And now, he's got a bigger following on YouTube than I do. So there you go. What are you going to do? So, congrats to him. But, anybody could do that. So that's an idea. Handwriting practice. So if you want to, try out any different types of script, there's a lot of different ones out there. The Fountain Pen Network is a good resource for different handwriting things. You can do Spencerian, Pitman shorthand, Gothic, Chancery. There's all kinds of different calligraphy type stuff that you could get into as well. Practicing, not just handwriting in terms of writing stuff, but like actual penmanship, I guess would be the correct word. That is a cool way to get to use your pens as well. NaNoWriMo, that's going on this month. If you have any inclination towards authorship, you can always write some short stories, or you can do poetry, any of that type of stuff. Not on quite a grand scale as a project scale as all these other things. If you're just looking for daily things, for me personally, I like to do a daily to-do list, and I use all kinds of technology. I've got laptop, I've got iPad, iPhone, all that kind of good stuff, and that's all great. But for me personally, I still really enjoy doing a manual to-do list every day, just of the top 5 or 6 things that I need to do that day. I write it out by hand every day, and something about just writing it down, and then when I accomplish it, I cross it out. It's much more satisfying to me to cross it out than it is to check a box or hit a button on my phone or whatever. I really like writing it out, so that's something. And like grocery lists and stuff like that, it's another idea. If I ever have any quick ideas or stuff like that, when I have ideas for putting videos together or anything like that, I'll usually lay that out by hand. So that's an opportunity right there. And then the last one I have, if you are in a work setting and you're trying to do any kind of brainstorming or you're trying to come up with any ideas, there's this concept called mind mapping. Okay, so this is something I learned from David Allen's book of Getting Things Done. Mind mapping is basically when you have a project or you have any kind of idea that you're trying to solidify. You basically take and you write the idea and you circle it, and then whatever pops into your head about that, you do a little offshoot and then you write the word. So for example, if you are working on, I'll use the context of what I'm doing. If I'm doing a Goulet Q&A and I have an idea of I don't know where I was going with that train of thought, but if I have an idea for a Goulet Q&A, like using your fountain pens for this video, I might do an offshoot and say Reddit, and then I might have an offshoot there that says ask questions on Reddit, follow up on previously listed questions. If I'm trying to get my thoughts moving, being able to write things like that. So go and look up David Allen's concept of mind mapping. It's kind of neat, but that's definitely that's all handwritten stuff. So that's something you can do as well. Here's my question. If I let an ink dry up in a pen, how can I clean the pen to ensure there isn't any dried ink left? I let mine sit for a couple of months, and though it didn't dry up completely, my pen did have a rough time trying to start writing. Well, yeah, what's happening there, especially a couple of months, that's kind of a long time, is some of the water is evaporated out. You got kind of the dye concentrate that's left in there, and that dye is just not going to flow very well. You need to reconstitute it with water. Now, technically, if you wanted to, just draw a little bit of water up into the pen, kind of shake it around, you very roughly would be able to get it back to its original form, sort of, maybe. But generally, when I have a pen like that that's actually having some flow issues, or maybe you get some crusting on the nib, or in the converter just gets kind of gunky and stuff because you've left the ink in there just flat out too long, it's usually best just to clean the whole pen out, clean it completely, and then put more ink in there. You know, the amount of ink that you're going to save of whatever's been dried up in your pen, it's not worth trying to salvage to get it to flow properly and be the right color and all that kind of stuff, because you're going to have a high amount of dye in there. It's going to completely change the color too, unless you can reconstitute it with water back to its original formulation, which is nearly impossible to do, especially when it's already in the pen. So that said, I would basically, you just flush it, you know, flush it with water over and over again until it's clear. In that kind of situation though, you may want to use something like a pen flush to try to clean out anything that's dried up in there. Me personally, I preach to a lot of people that you should clean out your pen. You know, if you're not going to be using it for more than a month, clean it out and then store it dried out. I do not necessarily practice what I preach there. I'm a busy guy and I love to ink up pens, love to try new colors and stuff like that. I am notorious for having pens that are half full of ink or need to be cleaned out and just kind of leaving them and picking up something else. I've got kind of a large collection of pens, and sometimes, you know, it's just easier to grab and ink up another pen than it is to clean out the one you got, and I'm really bad about that. So more often than not, the cleanings that I end up doing are full-on pen flushing, cleaning out old dried up ink, you know, doing all that kind of deal. So the one thing I will say, I've got a video on using the pen flush, so check out the Goulet pen flush video if you want to see how that's done. But really, it's not rocket science. You're just using water to flush out as much as you can, then use a pen flush. That'll clean up a lot of what the water can't get, and then flush it with clear water again, and you should be good to go. If you've got ink that's really, really dried up in there and is really stubborn, and you're cleaning it, and it's still coming out kind of, you know, the color of the ink, and it's not coming out as crystal clear water, then you need to keep on cleaning it. Basically, if you've got ink that's coming out with the water, you're doing something right. You're getting the ink out of there. You just got to keep going with it until it's done. I've had people that have written me before that had a pen that they found that must have been in a desk drawer for 10 years, 20 years, and it was inked up and crusty and stuff like that. And some of them had to clean it and maybe soak it for like a week or two before it finally was clean. So that's not unusual either. So that's definitely something you can do. And one trick that I like to do too, you know, if you're just flushing water through the pen, it can be hard to tell if there's trace amounts of ink still left in there. But if you are using a paper towel or a napkin or something and touching, after you clean it with water, you know, kind of touch the nib to the paper towel and it'll wick out, you know, water out of there. And if you got a bright white paper towel and you got a blue ink or something like that in there, any blue that's left in there mixed in with the water is going to show really bad on the paper towel, and that will expose whether the pen still needs to be cleaned more or not. So there you go. And one thing I kind of mentioned, I'm not sure if I made it stand out enough, but to use soaking as a method too. Now, generally speaking, I like to just soak in plain water. If you've got a pen that has any metal components in it, I wouldn't use that. I wouldn't soak that in a flush mixture of any kind. I would just use water, but just letting a pen sit in water for a while can help. Now, if you've got a pen that's made out of casein or something like that that absorbs water, you don't want to soak it in water for a long period of time. You'll have to use your judgment. You definitely never want to soak it in any type of denatured alcohol or acetone or anything like that. You'd be amazed sometimes, but I get some people that send me emails and pictures and stuff of a pen that they've soaked in some kind of acetone or nail polish or something like that, and they end up with a liquefied pen because acetone will melt plastic. So want to stick away from those, but soaking can be a method that you use for, you know, soak it for a couple of days to get dried up ink out of there as well. Okay. Hi, Brian. I recently got asked this by a colleague and wanted to know your thoughts on the issue. Is it less expensive, more expensive, or approximately the same expense to own and use a fountain pen versus a rollerball pen or a Pilot G2 or something similar? I said it was less expensive based off the usage of my TWSBI 580 and Noodler's Black after about 30 weeks. I know it's dependent on a lot of different variables, so we assumed a rollerball lasted 2 months and that the fountain pen needed refilled bi-weekly. Okay, so this is really going to depend on a lot of different things. As you mentioned, the cost of the fountain pen that you're buying, the cost of the roller pens that you're buying, you know, the consumption rate that you're going through is going to make a huge difference. The type of ink that you're buying, because ink can vary in price quite a bit. The type of paper that you're using regularly, because a more absorbent paper is going to use more fountain pen ink than a less absorbent one. So all of those things are going to come into play. So I'm just going to speak kind of generally here. In general, though, for the ink consumption alone, you're paying a significant premium for gel rollerball ink, okay? Even for ballpoint ink, you're actually paying a premium. For the amount of ink that you're actually getting, for the use you're getting out of it, you're paying much more for that ink than you would for fountain pen ink. Now that said, you have the investment of the pen, whatever cleaning supplies, your time, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a reason that fountain pens are not the most dominant used writing instruments today, right? There's a reason that ballpoints and gel rollerballs are a lot more popular. They're just a lot more convenient, right? They're just for strict utility sake, you know, they're a lower cost up front to buy them. You can buy them in bulk, and they make them in bulk, which then makes them less expensive because they're making them in bulk and so on. So as far as the pens go, it's like not a debate. Gel and ballpoints are cheaper. However, over the long haul, if you're sticking with a reliable fountain pen and using it for a long period of time, you will come out ahead. Now that said, if you're like me and you get the fountain pen bug and you end up buying 100 or more fountain pens, obviously it is not going to save you any money. Same thing goes with ink. If you fall in love with ink or paper or whatever and you end up just getting a whole collection of it and you end up with 50 bottles of fountain pen ink that you could never use even if you wrote every single day for the rest of your life, well, that's just the kind of thing that, you know, it's like any other hobby. Like the more you get into it, it doesn't necessarily become strictly for the cost savings. But if that is your goal, to strictly just save money on writing, you can do that with fountain pens. Yes, absolutely you can. Question from a newbie. When inking up your pen, should you Question from a newbie. When inking up your pen, should you shake the ink first, gently stir, or just take it as it sits? Oh boy, yeah, if you start researching this one, you're gonna get some conflicting information. So the answer is, it depends. Everybody's got a different opinion about this. There are some, I think the kind of, I'll call it the old school mentality, like the older, not old, but like the more classic mentality is ink should be good as it is. Just leave it sitting on the desk, ink it up, don't shake it. There are some people who I've read comments on FPN where it's like, you do not shake that ink. Like, well, all right, geez. So some people are so bold about that like it scares people. It's not that big of a deal, okay? You can shake the ink, no one will die. It's just ink. It's just, and I think that the mentality has been changing recently because more modern inks, noodlers, things like that, use a lot more dye, use different dye components, less conventional, less traditional manufacture of ink. And you'll get components that will settle out because you're literally saturating the dye beyond the point where it stays floating in the water, pretty much. So you're going to get settling and some slight chemical reaction and stuff in some of these inks. And shaking it up will help to get everything back into suspension again. So you could argue whether it's healthy or not to shake your ink, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is you can do whatever you want. It's your ink. It's not going to drastically change how it works in your pen that much for most inks. Now, there are some inks, like, for example, J. Herbon 1670 Rouge Hematite. That is an ink where if you leave that bottle sitting there, you'll literally see like a red, like powdery, like puddle kind of on the bottom of that bottle. And you shake that back up and everything gets back into suspension, you fill your pen, and that's how you go. That's because it's got like this like kind of sheen, this gold-like sheen, kind of this green gold thing that goes on. That's kind of what that stuff is. So it's literally saturated so heavily that it settles down into the bottle if it sits for a little while. So that you want to shake up. There's other inks that do it the same. Diamond Pumpkin is one that I can think that's more of a conventional ink that has that, but it'll get like little settling down in the corners of that bottle, shake it up, you're good to go. So me personally, I run into enough inks where it's worth it to me just go ahead and make it a habit to shake every bottle before I ink it up. But the honest truth is it's not going to matter that much for most inks, whether you do it or not. I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company.
My name is Rachel. I handle operations, HR, basically everything that is behind the curtain that makes everything run.
I am the vision, the voice, the face man of the Goulet Pen Company. I kind of set the direction for where the company goes. We are more of a local company, but the locality is based on your interest and not necessarily your geography.
We have a lot of great tools on our website between the Swap Shop, the Nibnut, the Pen Plaza.
And we recognize, of course, too, that most people shopping for fountain pens on our store, they're shopping online and they don't get to handle the pens in person. There is a bit of a gap to have to bridge there, being an online retailer for something that is so personal and so physical in nature.
Talk to us. We want to engage with you. Send us an email. We want to hear from you.
All right, our first Q in order for us to A is from Boone.Gilbreath.
Okay.
And they ask, what are your top 10 tips for new fountain pen owners? Brian's going to do 5,
a followership award.
and then I will do 5.
So these are not in any particular order, but I have 5 tips. So the first one that I will say is enjoy the journey. There's no one destination. The fun is in the exploration and learning as you go.
Love your journey.
Absolutely. After 14 plus years of doing this, I can say I'm still enjoying the journey every bit as much as I did. I have more pens now, and I have more experience, and I appreciate things. Interestingly enough, on one hand, it's like I'm not as enthralled with some of the same pens as I was in the beginning because, again, I'm used to them. I've seen so many of the same types of things. But I actually know so much more and deeper in a context around history and the companies and how they're made and all that kind of stuff that I appreciate things to a much richer level now than I did. So I'm less superficially kind of giddy about something like, ooh, that looks really
down with a solvent like acetone or something like that, don't have to worry about it coming off. But again, it's not bulletproof, as evidence here with my Lamy All-Star. When you do drop it and chip it, the anodize can come off, and you can't get the anodize back. You could maybe try to touch it up with some type of paint that looks close to that, but to get it back to original condition, it has to be stripped and then re-anodized. So here we have some metal pens. They're not anodized, they are painted. So whether it's a certain type of paint or a lacquer, you do have to be very cautious when you're painting metal. You have to prepare the surface properly. And a big red flag for me is when I see a metal pen and we're talking maybe $5, $10. I know there's going to be a problem if you just can't prepare the surfaces properly for that price point and do a proper paint job. But why is this such a big deal? Well, there's something called physics, and you have to understand what's really going on here. There's something called contact angle between the droplet, whether it's paint or water or whatever, and then the surface energy of the material you're painting. You need to reduce that contact angle ideally to 0 and increase the surface energy so that can happen to have a true proper bond. And that is not done by just simply wiping the part down with a solvent, acetone or something like that, and then painting it. That doesn't do it. You will have essentially a microfilm, down to a single molecule layer, even if you wipe and wipe and wipe. And and you're not going to have a proper chemical bond. That is not the way to do it. So at these price points, if it's like $5, you can't spend the money, you can't do the process to ensure you are obeying those rules and doing a proper paint job. And let me show you here. So this is the Amazon Basics. Nothing against the pen. I mean, for this price point, $10, it is what it is. But you can see already show some signs of wear here. I barely used this pen really just to do the review, tried it out for a week, played around with it, and this is chipping off already. And this is just simply from the clip. I'm barely touching it. Like maybe I'm sliding this over on and off the cover of a notebook, and that's it, and it's already chipping off. Here's a pen I've used longer, and in the section here, so this is a lot of contact with your hand, you can see the paint is coming off.
Or small 40 pens and you want to get to 100. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be very relative there. How expensive is your Grail pen? Literally, some people's Grail pen is a TWSBI 580 or a VAC 700R. That's not unusual for me here, but a Pilot Falcon or Lamy 2000, you know, even. Some other people, you know, their Grail pen is a Pilot Custom Urushi or the, Namiki Emperor Torimon that I showed last week. That's their Grail pen. Very different. You know, if you have, you can have a collection of Lamy 2000s and Pilot Vanishing Points, for example, but then your Grail pen can be a $5,000 pen. So this is going to be very different than what you're talking about. If you don't, for me, I think the question to think about is if you don't actually love your Grail pen, if you get it and it doesn't quite live up, how easy would it be to sell it or recoup that money? You know, if your Grail pen is one specific vintage pen that is like really hard to find, isn't particularly valuable, super niche, but you just really want it bad and you pay for it and you don't love it, how easy is it for you to turn around and sell it and then put it back into the rest of your collection if you are so inclined to do that? I think that's something to consider for sure. And then, have you had a chance to actually hold or write with your Grail pen first? Or is it just kind of your own perception or hype or an idea in your mind that you have like, I really love this pen, but then you actually hold it and you're like, oh, this is really backweighted and I just don't like the way this thing writes. That's a huge bummer. Or it's like, oh, I really wanted this special nib grind. If you're like, whatever, I really wanted this specific kind of, like Sailor, for example, has a lot of these really interesting nib grinds, King Eagle nib or something. Like I really wanted not Emperor, King of Pens. Sorry, Emperor's Namiki. I really wanted a King of Pens with a King Eagle nib. And then you get it and you're like, oh, this nib writes really fat. I can't really use this thing as much as I want to. Dang it. That could be a disappointing kind of thing. So, are you going to be able to kind of know what you're getting into first? I think it depends on, you fall into, kind of one of two classes. I think about people who are minimalists. These are people who will buy pens, and if they're not in their regular rotation, using them every day or have some really meaningful significance to them, they will sell them, get rid of them, recoup what they can out of it, even if it's only 60% of what they paid for, and they'll apply it towards their next pen, whether it's expanding their collection, breadth-wise, or going deeper and more expensive. I know plenty of people who will do that. They're like, I have a 10-pen case, that's all I want it to be, and I will rotate things out until those 10 pens there are the absolute best 10 pens in the world for me. Totally cool. I support that and respect that a lot, actually, that discipline to be able to do that. Me? I'm not really able to do that. I have a huge case over here filled with pens because just my style of collecting and just the referenceability and the accessibility of them. I'm an extremely tangible person. I don't have a great verbal memory. So when I'm trying to think back, it's like, oh man, like about pen details, I have an okay visual memory. But I'm trying to think back, like, yeah, how does the weight compare? So, like for example, Pilot Custom Urushi, I'm like, how does the weight of this compare to Visconti Opera Master? And I'm like, I can kind of remember, like, man, I remember it was lighter. I don't remember how much, but if I pick up the pens and hold it, I'm like, oh, boom, like it just triggers my memory immediately. So for me, I like to have a lot of pens on hand because it's easy for reference, and that's just the way that I work. Not everybody's the same way. You may not have the same need to recall stuff like that, like I do, so it's not anything to worry about at all. But me, it's like, oh man, was that pen eyedropper convertible? I'm trying to remember, but then I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like it just boom, just holding it in my hand, instantly triggers it back, and I'm good. So that's just my style. I'm not a minimalist. I'm more what I would call an acquirer. Or a collector. Yes, collector is just a more disciplined version of an acquirer. But acquirer is like, I get pens and I generally hang on to them. I do not get rid of them in my personal collection. Of course, buying pens and selling pens is my day job, right? Like, and that's why this whole Goulet pen company exists. But in my personal life here, I rarely sell or give away pens because it's part of my little collection, right? And I'm sure that it's got to have a limit at some point. I don't know where that is yet. I keep raising the bar for myself there. But for me, just the way I started out is I went incremental. Like, I did kind of blend the two. I kind of fell into both camps. So for me, I started out really slow. I was getting like Noodler's Nib Creepers, Lamy Safari, Pelican Script, I think that's some of my earliest pens, the Petite one, the Kaweco Classic Sport, just relatively inexpensive pens like that, and kind of amassed a variety and collection of those. Part of that was because I needed to get a breadth of fountain pen experience, just as a person who's in the business, right? Like, and I needed to kind of get it. I was getting asked about a lot of things, I never used them, so I kind of spread it around. So for me to buy just random expensive pens didn't make a lot of sense for me at that time. I did do that a little bit, I got into some gold nibs, but I went entry level stuff. Pilot Custom 74 was my first gold nib, and then it was Lamy 2000, and I kind of went incrementally there. So that first year that I was in fountain pens largely was less expensive pens. I did do that first year, I did one kind of Hail Mary pass on a pen, not pass, I'm thinking like football analogy now, but I did like one Hail Mary purchase, which was a Pelican M800 with a 1.5mm stub. And I had never used it before. I'd heard so many good things about the Pelican M800, and it was a blue version with I loved stub nibs. So I was like, oh my gosh, if I love a Pelican Script stub, how much am I gonna love a 1.5mm stub on an M800? And I had no experience with it. I just bought it. It was a stretch for me at the time. I got it. I had the wildest expectations, and I got let down just because I didn't do my research. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I overbought on something that I didn't have proper expectations for. And even to this day, I just, I've gotten over it now. Of course, that was 7 years ago. But I have a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth just because of my own ignorance and lack of just awareness around what I was doing. Now, just like everything in the early days of Goulet pens and my own experience, I've learned through mistakes, right? Like the first ink that I ever bought, I thought it was more saturated than it really was because I saw it when it was wet. I didn't see it when it was dry in a pen. That's why we sell samples now. That's why we have a swab shop. Like, I've taken a lot of those things and tried to use my own negative experiences, or not even truly negative, just less than expectations experiences, and try to turn those into, okay, what can I do to help you all avoid that so that you can go faster on the curve of the learning curve of getting into fountain pens, and you can get quickly into the things that you really truly enjoy. Because there's kind of there's a hump you gotta get over a little bit with learning how to use fountain pens, stuff like that. But once you cross over that hump, like you find generally what nib sizes you like and what inks you like and all this kind of stuff, then your enjoyment level goes way up. And you get a long life ahead of you enjoying fountain pens. So I want to try to shorten that life. A little bit different experience that I had 2 years ago. So this is I had a much more fountain experience under me. I had much more of an idea of what I kind of liked. So I had on my radar the Visconti Homo sapiens, right? Very common, holy grail pen for everybody. So for me, I waited until we actually started carrying the brand. I didn't buy it at the time. I knew based on demand how popular it was going to be, and I got to try and stuff like that and holding all that. But in terms of buying one for my personal collection and carrying it around, I didn't do that until after we actually started carrying the brand. And I took my time. I tried different nib sizes. Of course, I do like writing samples for the nib book and all that kind of stuff, and I had to do all that. But I got to write with them all and really determine what it was that I was going to like. And then once I was able to do that, I knew that I was really going to enjoy it. And I've been enjoying it as a daily carry now for basically 2 years. So I learned from my previous approach. It's not that I substantively did much different. I just had more awareness about what I was getting into. So for me personally, I think it's my own experiences. It was better to kind of build up and get into it. And I think if you have a minimalist approach, yeah, it'll take you a little bit of time to try out, higher and higher level pens and kind of work your way up to Holy Grail. But I think that in the end will be better for you than just kind of, just randomly buying pens you think you might like and then not. But you certainly could, like my Pokemon 100, for example. I could have gotten that and been like, yeah, this pen just didn't live up to my expectations. I could have sold it at 80% of its value right away, easily, and recouped most of that back and then applied that towards the next pen and really not have lost out a great deal. I would have learned, you know what I mean? But you can bypass a lot of that if you were able to go to a pen show or do a pen meetup or maybe just link up with somebody online, do a pen swap or something. It's hard to do pen swaps with Holy Grail pens, but certainly you could have some resources there to be able to try before you buy of sorts. Or if you obviously if you have a brick and mortar store, if you have a Holy Grail pen, it's a $5 pen, they may not let you ink it up and try it, but you might be able to hold it at least. So you can at least try, educate yourself, read reviews, do all that kind of stuff, of course. But there's nothing like actually having it and writing with it to be able to tell. So if you can do a pen meetup or something like that, that can help tremendously for anybody that has. You can let them know, like, hey, this is not Homo sapiens, it's my Holy Grail pen. Does anybody have one I can write with that I can try? Because I really want to make sure I know. That's a way that you can kind of skip some of the steps in that whole process that I just talked about. But that's the approach I've taken. That's what I recommend. What's the best starter fancy pen? Starter fancy pen. So this one is very much open to interpretation for me. It depends what you consider fancy, I guess. Personally, I'm going to say, don't really worry too much about the fanciness of your pen when you're first starting out. And I don't say that because I don't think fancy pens are cool or exciting. I say that because pretty much when you're first starting out, every fountain pen seems fancy. I'm not joking. Like, I break out a Pilot Metropolitan, plain black, nothing super crazy going on, or a Pilot Varsity, preppy, anything like that. And people see that nib and they start writing with it, and immediately that pen is fancy. Like, it doesn't have to have a lot of embellishments on it and crazy acrylics and translucents and power double back fillers and all this kind of stuff. That stuff is like, can't even compute with most people. Most people just starting out, just a fountain pen that works is fancy, right? So that's why I say, like, don't get too obsessed with the fancy thing right off the bat. I think literally any fountain pen that have decent is going to be fancy looking, feeling more than most people have used of any pen. For more slightly more seasoned pen folks, so say it's not like you're just being handed a fountain pen for the first time and you're like, what is this thing? But you're like, okay, you've got a pen, you're kind of bought and sold on the concept, you want to get into it a little bit, but you're newer to the hobby. Okay, that's kind of where I'm kind of assuming your question is coming from, because you're submitting a question, you're obviously enough in it to be involved here, right? So I would say, I'm going to consider for slightly more seasoned pen folk to consider fancy meaning slightly more the aesthetics of the pen than just the fountain penness of it, just the fact that it is a fountain pen, but a little bit more to the aesthetics, some visual appeal, some slightly larger size maybe, or something cool in the design. So I got a few pens that just kind of came top of mind to me. The Conklin Durograph and All American, both sub $100 pens. Durograph is nice in there in like a $50 range. You're getting cast resin materials here instead of injection molded plastics. So you got a lot of depth of material, kind of a classic vintage design that just doesn't look like most other pens that are out today, like something you would find on an office supply shelf. Slightly larger pens, some vibrant colors. I think they're worth a look. The Lamy Lux, really any of the Lamy Safari All-Stars, but definitely the Lux lends itself more to kind of that fanciness. It's got very much that like Apple iPhone kind of clean look to it. TWSBI, really any of them, but the VEC 700R or the 580 have a little kind of polished look, the faceted design, some cool components. You can see how they operate. I think the fancy factor goes up quite a bit with those. The Monteverdi and Vincia, you get some carbon fiber in there, some different trim materials and stuff. Cool looking pens. I would say they qualify. The Pilot Vanishing Point, basically any of them, but if you want to go nuts, the Rod Galaxy. Probably out of starter range here, but really the Vanishing Point, it's maybe a little bit outside the most starter pen range, but it's not crazy for everybody, so it's worth a mention because it is kind of an intro gold mid pen range. Really any of the Edison pens, I think any of them would fit in there. Again, it's a bit more of an investment. You're in that Vanishing Point price range, in the 150 to 180 range there. But really anything Edison kind of fits in there. You get into some of the same appeal that the Conklin Durograph and All American have. Those cast resin materials. This one's American made. The Edison, you get some cool different designs and lots of fun materials. The Visconti Rembrandt with Van Gogh, neat materials themed after the paintings from Van Gogh. In the pen community, we often seem to talk about quality control only if it's poor. Flipping this on its head, what brand would you praise for excellent QC? Could you give an example of a company that typically sells pens under $100 and another typically over $100 that you feel deserves praise on the nib QC? Thank you. Well, I think this gives a nod back to the question that I had last week about the Visconti nibs and the Helix 188, no, 87, 88. Which one was it? I can't remember. I wrote down 87, but I thought it was last week, which would have been 88. Dang. Anyway, I think, yes, people have a tendency to want to spread negative information more than positive. If somebody cuts you off on the way to work, you are way more likely to tell a story about that person that cut you off than you are about the probably 40 other people that use their turn signal appropriately and merged without any drama. It's just human nature, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff sticks out more in our mind. Not only that, but when you deal with online stuff, especially expensive pens and things that people are very passionate about, when there's negative stuff, especially people that don't have any experience with that tend to want to share and spread that. It's kind of like an online gossip, right? And what's the harm? Who cares? It's like it's all anonymous and all that kind of stuff. Any degree of anonymity that you have only just kind of makes that spread even more further. It's human nature. It's not really to fault anybody, but I'm glad you asked this question because it does shed some light onto maybe some of the brands that don't. Well, I'm not going to say don't talk about. A lot of the brands that good QC do get talked about for good reason, but it does tend to get overshadowed. Not nearly to the degree as brands that have negative things going on. So let's see here. I think there's no question that the Japanese brands are phenomenal in terms of their quality. I think it's woven deep into their culture, and they take it very, very seriously. Whenever there's any type of quality concern that I bring up to any of our Japanese brands, it's like I have to make sure that I know exactly what the heck I'm talking about because they will investigate and they'll take it very seriously, and it helps me in communicating to them to have all my ducks in a row. If there's any type of QC issue with Pilot or Platinum or anybody, I don't deal with Sailor anymore, but I'm sure they're the same way. They take that stuff very, very seriously. So Pilot specifically, I'll say the QC is phenomenal. It's not perfect, but given the amount of pens they produce, it's pretty amazing. They cover a full range of prices, so you got into your question of like the over under $100 here. I think especially their pens that are under $100 is truly impressive as to their quality control, because when you get into pens like the Metropolitan and the Kakuno and stuff like that, certainly when you get into having to produce a pen of that quality at that scale, it would certainly lend an opportunity to sacrifice on quality control, especially on nibs, but that really is not the case very much. I hear about things here and there more often than not. I think what I end up seeing with pens like the Metropolitan, where there are people like, oh, the times in this line seems right scratchy. A lot of times it has been in the past where people just have not filled them or not been aware when they've run out, especially when pens are coming with the squeeze converter. Now they're starting to come with Con 40s, the clear piston converters. But when they're coming just with the other ones, a lot of times they would start to run out of ink, and people would press on tap and stuff like that. So it would be kind of inadvertent user error that would cause some of these issues. That was a lot of what we saw around here that was happening, especially newer people get into it. It's a very affordable pen. That tends to happen a little bit more with affordable pens. True QC issues get a little bit harder to separate out from just not having enough ink in the pen and stuff like that. So that's where you got to be careful about kind of separating that stuff out there. But it is based on my experience, the number of pens like that we've seen come through here, it's pretty amazing the quality that we've seen. I've always been very impressed with that. Platinum also deserves a nod, especially for Platinum Preppy. That is a super affordable pen. The quality is fantastic. You hear about some things of like some cracking issues and stuff like that, durability stuff here and there. Yeah, it's definitely less affordable. It's a more affordable pen, so you're gonna run into some durability things here and there. But again, given the number of pens that are out there, it's not nearly an issue like you would think it would be. I think German brands also take consistency and quality very seriously. I know that is the case. Lamy is pretty dang consistent. I think they do get some flack on some of their steel nibs, especially like the extra fines, because there's a small percentage of them from their overall pens that end up dealing with some line variation, things like that, and some people have different expectations about how they should write. So I think they deserve a tip of the hat. But I know that there's some feelings out there about that, so I don't want to just brush that aside. But in general, especially in terms of like the actual pen quality and stuff like that, pretty dang awesome. And you consider what these pens cost, it's pretty cool. And then Pelikan, I think, deserves a high marks for quality too, especially in the higher price ranges. I don't deal a lot with their lower price pens. We try carrying them here and there, and the quality's always been good. But I think some of their higher end pens, the quality is what they're really known for. You pay premium for it. You pay on the upper end for the Pelikan pens, but you're always getting a really good product too. And then going back to Pilot, talking especially Pilot and Namiki, has to get mentioned in the upper range, over $100 for sure. Especially like the Vanishing Point stuff is really good quality. But when you get into those Namiki Makies and stuff like that, no question those are some of the best pens in the world because of the attention they get, how seriously they take their quality. So that's what I think deserves most recognition based on your parameters of the question.
Art.
Some of them are more universal. Really, it just comes down to economies of scale. If a nib manufacturer can make one type of nib, sell it to a bunch of different companies, they can do that and produce them more en masse, make them cheaper, therefore more appealing, and it's a competitive edge, right, for Bakugo, Yovo, or whoever else. And so there's an appeal to that. At the same time, if they are universal, you're like, well, what's the difference between one pen and the other? If the actual writing portion of it is the same as, say, Yovo nibs, isn't the same Yovo nib the same? Yes, there could be some tweaking and stuff that's done at the individual manufacturer level, and of course you have the feed and other things that come into play too, but more or less, the nib could be viewed as the important part of the pen, and everything else is kind of just vanity, right? To a degree, I can see that argument, right? Like there's other things going on. You get element of craftsmanship, there's size and functionality, the filling mechanism, all that kind of stuff. But yes, to a degree, the nib could be considered somewhat universal if you're using a Blocker Yovo across a different brand, right? But there's other things that come into play. What ends up happening, you have these economies of scale, universal nibs, they can make them in large batches. That means they can afford to sell the same type of nib to an Edison, or we argue nibs, all Yovo, or TWSBI uses Yovo nibs too. So different manufacturers of pens cannot have to basically make a huge investment of developing custom nibs. They can use what are really good nibs and fit them on their pens. And you could say, like, okay, the Yobo number 6 nib on a TWSBI VAC 700R, how do you compare that to, say, a Edison Collier, right? Like, they might do some individual tweaking, the feeds are different, the pen bodies are different, the phone mechanism, yada, yada. But part of that comes down to the different manufacturing, the other elements of the pen too. So, I think about like TWSBI, like they have a factory over in Taiwan, they produce much greater quantities of pens than, say, Edison does, right? Like Edison is a much smaller manufacturer. They have, like 4 people in their company in Milan, Ohio, and it's American made. There's an element of hand craftsmanship and stuff like that. They might be different from some of these other manufacturers. A lot of different things come into play, and they might use different materials and stuff that come into play, and there's a lot of different factors that come in. So typically, from my perspective, what's happening with these is it's not so much that there is what I consider to be a premiumization of let's just see how much we can get away with charging by making it look a little snazzier. I'm seeing less of that actually. There's definitely some of that goes on, and some brands will certainly make a play for going kind of the luxury route, charging a premium and making the packaging really nice, stuff like that. All depends on kind of what their target market is, right? Definitely here at Goulet, we have kind of more of an emphasis on new people getting in the fountain pen hobby, so there's more of an emphasis on value and less so on kind of the branding and the premiumization type of stuff like you're talking about. But I don't think that as a whole that's like a super universal thing, especially what you're talking about here with these universal nibs. I think a lot of them are more boutique brands. There's smaller manufacturers that just have to charge because they're just dealing with smaller quantities and stuff like that. So there's less economies of scale. Let's say a Lamy or a Pilot or something like that. So these brands, I think I've only been around in the pen industry for about 8 years, so I have to rely on kind of what others tell me. I've been in the industry for a lot longer, but from what I understand, over the last 8 years, I'm seeing a little bit less, or I'm starting to see a shift a little bit away from premiumization, actually. I'm starting to see more manufacturers making an effort to come out with more affordable pens, starting to understand that, okay, if we keep on going up in our price and going premium, yes, we might be kind of aging with the pen market, we're not bringing anything new in, and that's going to kind of play itself out, and then we're all going to suffer in the end. So that's starting to kind of come around for some manufacturers. So starting to see some emphasis in that, and I really like that. I think more of an emphasis was in like the 90s and the 2000s, coming out with like $2,000 limited editions constantly. That was a much more common thing. Certainly some brands will still do that, but there's more of an emphasis. Some lower price things that are going to start coming up too. So I think it's some brands are kind of balancing both, but I think that I'm seeing probably less of that now as being a trend for pen brands. I also collect whiskey, and we've seen a lot of premiumization, i.e. brands charging high prices for average whiskey. How do you know where to start? I just like the frankness of that question. I feel like there's so many options and it's hard to know what to consider. Size, weight, flex, non-flex. It's daunting and hard to know what you're really getting without being able to test drive the pens. I do agree. It is hard. I empathize with that, especially because most people don't really think that intently about their writing instruments, but then when they kind of get into fountain pens, there's so much to kind of get into and explore and discover that all of a sudden you think about how much a pen weighs, whereas you probably never thought of. If you ever had to design an ink bottle, you've done ink and pen, so why not ink bottles? What would it look like? Assuming you're going for both beauty and practicality, how much ink would you have it holding? What bits of various bottles would you want to keep? What thing would you do that no one else seems to have thought about? And what bits of other bottles would you not use at all? So for me, I think the perfect size of ink bottle is 50 milliliters. It's a good amount of ink. It's not too much. When you get above 50 milliliters, you're really committed to that bottle of ink. And it's in all practical. Like if you have one ink color that you love, having more than 50 milliliters might make sense. But like I have plenty of Noodler's 3-ounce bottles. Literally, I've only ever gone through one of those bottles completely, which is Noodler's Black, which I've used for every Nibnook writing sample that we've ever done for all the pens that have come through this building. That's the only one that I've gone through an entire 3-ounce Noodler's bottle in the 8 years that I've been involved in fountain pens. So you really don't need more than 50 milliliters, in my opinion. You can always buy multiple bottles. You can always get, so I think that's a perfect amount. You go less than that and you get kind of small and it becomes the ink level, it gets more difficult to fill. So I really like 50 ml just because of a standard amount. I love the design of the Pilot Roche Shizuku bottles. I love the design of the Pelikan Edelstein bottles. I like kind of that cleaner look, more of a polished bottle, a little bit heavier glass. I like that look. Of course, it costs more to do that kind of stuff, but whatever. We're not talking about cost here. You're just talking about ink design. No, I do like that. I like having a wide neck. That's also what I like about both of those bottles. I'm really not a fan of the really narrow necks. I mean, I'm a wide neck. I want you don't have to worry about any pen filling out of that bottle, and both of those are really good for that. What would be really cool if you have some kind of an ink reservoir. So I know like some of the ink bottles, like you think about the Roche Shizuku's got a little dip in the middle. Lamy has got a nice dip for a kind of a reservoir. Going with that, like Mont Blanc, their kind of shoe bottle, nice reservoir there. I like that concept. I really do. It's definitely more expensive to design a bottle like that as opposed to some symmetrical thing. But I would really try to incorporate something like that if it was at all practical. I wouldn't do it at any cost, but if it could be practical to incorporate something in there. That, or you could go the route of like maybe a Namiki bottle that has a plastic insert, or like you think about like the TWSBI Inkwell, how it has a plastic insert in there. That works pretty well in terms of being able to fill when ink level gets low. That's really kind of what I'm going at with all that stuff. So those are all really cool. And then I'm not super into like string on my bottles, so it's like even at Roche Shizuku, as much as I love that ink, I always get ink all over the string. And I think part of the idea with the string is it can catch a little bit of the ink if it kind of goes over, but it's like then it gets all inky and it just looks kind of gross, and I end up tossing it. So most of my Roche Shizuku bottles don't have the string on them, just because I ditch the string. And I think about like Jeroboam has like really nice looking elements on their ink bottles, but then like as I'm using them, I get like ink everywhere and it ends up kind of like looking splotchy and stuff. So I would rather have like more of a clean, crisp bottle. Like that's what I like about the Edelsteins. They don't even have a paper, label on the bottle itself. It's like a imprinted, kind of thing, or overlay on the glass itself. That I actually really like a lot. So that component I would probably try to do from Edelstein. And then an interesting concept that I like would be like the filler tube, like you have on the TWSBI Inkwells. You know how you can attach the pen to it? And it's got like a tube that goes down and kind of draws the ink up. I think that's really cool. And trying to incorporate something like that could be maybe more universal. I don't know if it'd be practical to do something like that on like every bottle of ink that would go out, or if that's more of an Inkwell or like a Stipula Netto system or something like that. The TWSBI Inkwell. Having something like that, it might require more engineering cost than would be practical to include on every single bottle of ink as it goes out. So I don't know, maybe I just need to concentrate on developing more of a just traveling inkwell specifically sort of situation. But that I think is just a really cool kind of fascinating thing. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. Just kind of top of mind thing going on with ink bottles. Business models based on selling on Amazon. For sure, Amazon is the juggernaut in e-commerce, especially in the US. And I think they represent probably as much of e-commerce as all the rest of e-commerce combined. So they are, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or in the, I don't know if that metaphor has in the room. I know there's an elephant in the room. Is there a gorilla in the room? I don't know. They're the 800-pound gorilla. Whether they're in the room or not, they're a gorilla. So they're huge, right? And they're an enticing, place. Their marketplace is enticing as a business owner because it seems like you just list it there and things sell and your work is done. Well, being a business person, I know that it's never that simple. Yes, they have a marketplace, but they also take a cut of everything you sell, and it's a fairly significant cut, especially being in retail and selling, kind of third-party goods. It's not my own product I'm manufacturing. I'm selling stuff that is available elsewhere. So there's far less to distinguish me on Amazon, especially if you end up using their fulfillment services, which is what they definitely want to drive towards. Which then, of course, if you use their fulfillment services, they take even more of a cut, and it gets really hard to actually run a profitable business doing it that way. Where the people that I know that have had successful businesses on Amazon, and they're usually smaller businesses than what we have here, they end up buying high-margin items from overseas, Taiwan and China and stuff like that, and they sell it on Amazon using Amazon as a marketplace. They mark it up like crazy, and then the cut that Amazon takes is not as painful because they're not paying as much for the initial product. But then it's like, what branding is there, and they don't get repeat customers, and it's really all just price driven, because that's kind of how the Amazon marketplace algorithm is structured. Is it's always geared towards the lowest price. So when you think about a niche industry like we have at fountain pens, if it's all price driven, very hard to differentiate yourself, not as much to distinguish, they take a big cut, basically all your margin, it just becomes much less of an obvious opportunity. So that has just not been very interesting to me, especially with the way that we develop things at Goulet. You know, having a personal approach towards our service, the videos, the education, our packing, and the way that we kind of present everything to you. It's got to be kind of its own ecosystem. And then the way that we build the website with all the custom things we have, like, you know, the swap shop and ink samples and all this kind of stuff, like, we would never be able to sell all that through Amazon, and be able to package all that together and do order changes and combine orders when you order two things, you know, and we're able to do that. So it becomes just really, really difficult for us to do that kind of thing. Aside from the fact that if you have looked at recently, half the time we can't even keep in stock the things that are hot and moving anyway. So, you know, why would I try to go and sell them on some other marketplace when I can't even stock my own store like I want to? So, you know, there's a lot of just different things and all that that make it so that, you know, it's just less of an obvious opportunity for us. So we're going to continue to focus on doing what we do best and kind of building our own little Goulet ecosystem within GouletPens.com. Does oblique medium of the Lamy 2000 get any stub-like line variation? What would be the point of oblique if there was absolutely none? Because if the tip is round with zero variation, it doesn't matter whether the pen is held like this or like this, which is what the obliques allow, right? Okay. So it's interesting that you asked this, and timely, because we just got in the Lamy 2000 oblique broad and oblique double broad. I don't believe we got any oblique mediums. We kind of placed like a special order into Lamy and got a few of them. It's not anything that I think we're going to have as a regular supply, but we have a couple. And being the pen nerd that I am, as soon as they came in, I was like, and so I kept an oblique. I already had an oblique medium, technically, actually, that I acquired years ago. I got an oblique broad and oblique double broad. And I've done some nib grinding training with various folks, and so I very much understand how to make obliques. And so it's interesting to see, for me, like how Lamy does obliques, because even when I went toward Lamy in December, I didn't see the specific nib grinds that they do. I only got to see other aspects of their manufacturing. So it's kind of interesting for me to see. So I did writing samples for all three of them that I'm going to share with you here today. So the oblique medium, I mean, it's the basic principle of it is it's kind of like a stub that is ground at an angle. And I've done nib sizes and grinds in Fountain Pen 101, and I won't go into deep detail about obliques necessarily, but I will cover a little bit. So these are writing samples of all three. And I show these to show you basically the finer the oblique is, the less variation you're actually going to see. I mean, you can see there's a little bit there, especially when you get over to the X's. And if you're writing in block print, it actually shows up a little bit more than just with traditional cursive. So it's really going to depend on your handwriting style. But the broader you go, the more variation you see, especially when you get to that double broad, the X's gets a little more pronounced, I guess, right? But even when you're writing in the cursive script, it's not very dramatic. Oblique nibs, basically what an oblique is, I'll try and real-time draw out an example of an oblique with an oblique, meta oblique. So let me throw out the fresh sheet here for you. So when you have an oblique, typically your nib is going to be, I'll do a drawing like this. You get the nib, there's your slit, and then you're going to have you know, kind of a round ball. This is a terrible drawing. But there's your typical nib, right? So if you're looking at the face of the nib, just like I'm holding the pen like this is what you're going to see, you know, nice and rounded. With an oblique, you can do it tilted one way or the other, but I'm going to do what is typical and what the Lamy ones are, which is called a left foot oblique. That is where basically the nib is ground such that you don't see this part. So it's ground a little bit of a slant. And what does that actually buy you? It allows you to basically rotate the pen in your hand to the left, a left foot oblique, so that if you rotate the pen in your hand or you twist your hand a little bit, it allows you to write like that fashion. So it's subtle. It's not as drastic as a stub. It's not as drastic as an Architect's, but it's going to be somewhat drastic if you hold it, not drastic. It's going to be subtle line variation if you hold it at a very, very, very specific angle, depending on your writing style. So it's the kind of thing that like obliques have become somewhat obscure recently. Basically, no one offers them stock. Pelikan offered some, but even they're scaling them back. Lamy, this is the first I've used their broader obliques because they don't offer them regularly. And I don't know anyone else that really does offer them regularly. It's something that usually you see kind of custom ground from Nibmeisters or you see them with vintage pens. But there are people out there who obliques is like, hallelujah, you know, and it's like the answer to all of their pen troubles, and it's just the way that they love to write, and then they usually find a custom Nibmeister and get everything ground to that liking. You know, it's for me, it adds a little bit of flair maybe, but it's also for me, it's such an adaptive way to write that I'm like, okay, I can do it, but it's just not for me. And like I passed my obliques because we had, you know, this Lamy 2000 and we had the other Lamy, the steel nib obliques a little while ago. And I passed those around to my team, and all but like 1 or 2 people hated them on the team. Like they were just couldn't get into right, or they wrote with them, but they're like, this is just frustrating because you have to hold it at a specific angle, and it's not as forgiving as regular nib. But there were like one, especially like Kelsey on our team, I remember she used it and picked it up and was like, oh, this is the best pen I've ever written with. And I was like, who knew? So it's in a just weird place right now with obliques because there's not a lot of them like super affordable where a bunch of people can just like try them and see if they like them. Even with Lamy 2000, like it's not a cheap pen. So even if you were to like look at our site and be like, oh, should I get an oblique double broad? I don't know. It's $167. It's not the cheapest thing to just experiment with. But for a very select few people, it's going to be like the best pen you've ever written with. For most everybody else, it's going to be like, meh, you know. It's going to be interesting maybe, but it's not going to be like your favorite nib. So it just kind of gets into this weird place where it's hard to know until you try it, but then it's hard to try it because you can't get it. So hopefully this helps for you at all. But the bottom line is if you're going for line variation, go with a stub. Don't go with an oblique. The oblique, especially in a medium, it's going to be so specific and so difficult to tell the line variation that basically you just need to consult a nibmeister and see what it is that you're going for, and they can just cater something specific to your needs. There's nothing widely available that's going to be an oblique medium that I can name for you that I think is worth you just kind of winging it and trying out. Are there any pens that you first disliked that grew on you over time? I really didn't like my TWSBI 580 when I first got it, then months later I picked it up again and appreciated it. Now it's a daily carry. Well, that's cool, you know, sort of a Black Swan kind of story for you. I don't necessarily have like pens that I absolutely hated and now I absolutely love. A lot of pens I have a pretty good gut instinct for, like, yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of that. But I do have some a little bit over time that have grown on me. You know, when the TWSBI Eco first came out, I was really excited about just the pricing and the prospect and stuff like that. The cap really bothered me. You know, it's the hexagonal cap on the Eco. I don't love it. I still don't love it. It was kind of a turn off for me and I really didn't use it much at first. It was a kind of scenario where I knew we would get a lot of questions about it, so I kept one personally. I think I kept like a white cap one in broad. I was like, I don't really want to write with this thing, so I'll just keep whatever we have stock of that I know people will want the least. So I kept that. And then I inked it up. I kept it inked up with the same ink for like 8 months, and the thing just freaking wrote every time. And so I was like, okay, I don't love the aesthetics of the cap, but dang it, if this isn't a great writer and a phenomenal value. Now, basically every color of Eco that's been coming out, I've been keeping one, and I'm like, well, daggone, I'm just a freaking Eco collector now. What do you know? It's a very reliable pen. I'm a huge fan of how it writes. So that might be an example of something that I didn't love because of one aspect of the aesthetics, but the writing kind of turned me around. Let's see the next one. Lamy Safari actually was not a huge fan at first. You know, I've also become an accidental collector of Safaris, but I really, and especially like when we got into some of the special editions, it was like neon green, neon coral, you know, and it was just like all these greens and yellows and stuff, and I was like, okay, enough of that. But then they started to come out with like the dark lilac, petrol, the all black, and I was like, okay, these matte finishes, I'm more into them. I know not everybody loves them, but I like the matte finishes a little better. The more subtle colors are really cool. I think they're probably due for going a little wilder now. They've gone matte for a couple of years and dark for a couple of years. Maybe mix it up a little bit, Lamy. Just a little hint of a suggestion there if that matters at all. They're not gonna watch this video. But anyway, so you know, that's one that definitely has grown on me. I have this whole freaking Safari collection now. But that one is one that kind of came around on. Let's see here, the Traveler's Pen. So this one, it's a relatively recent acquisition that we've had here. I carried around on my Traveler's notebook, which actually fits quite nicely, as you might guess. They make both of these. But it's this little brass pen, and I'm not a huge pocket pen guy. I have big hands. I like really thick pens, generally pretty heavy pens. But something about just the portability of this. It's cartridge only, so it's got like a lot of things about it that, like on paper, I wouldn't necessarily be like, yeah, sign me up. But I saw that there would be an appeal for this, so I was always on board from the beginning for us to carry this pen. But then once we got it in and I held it, and I was like, oh, this thing is solid. And I like brass and copper pens and stuff like that, where it gets a lot of character. Like my resin pens, like, you know, it's one thing for them to get kind of, you know, just battle worn, you know, desk worn or whatever. You know, get little micro scratches and little dings and stuff like that. And then I'm always kind of like, oh, I try to like polish this up a little bit. But actually, when I get like, you know, my you know, copper mule from Monograppa and like the brass pen and stuff like that, I actually like to let them just patina and just I beat them up a little bit and carry them around a little more rougher. You know, it's like this one I had actually in my pocket next to my pocket knife, and like I wasn't even thinking about it. I had the blade edge of the knife like up against this thing, so it's like all scratched up on the side here. And I was like, actually, that's kind of cool because it's like that's my story. That's how I use it. So just like the character this pen has, and then it's actually a very reliable writer. It's a very small pen, but then when you post it, it does. So I actually freaking love this pen now. So this one it's not that I hated it at first. It just wasn't a pen for me, and now I like carry it around with me everywhere I go, just because it's super durable and it's just I don't have to think about it kind of a pen. I just keep a couple extra cartridges in there, and I'm like, I don't really care what color or whatever it is that I use. It's just a when I need to grab a pen kind of pen. Okay, and then the last one that I have, this one is interesting. So this wasn't so much that I hated it. It was just like a what is that? So this is a vintage pen called the Lamy Lady. So they had a couple different patterns. This is one I affectionately refer to as the Golden Cow. But it's actually a really nice pen. It's body's made of porcelain. It's actually a pretty freaking expensive, cool pen. It's got this interesting gold nib, which Lamy doesn't make on any of their current pens. So it's a really interesting pen. And you know, it doesn't have a clip, but it's got these little roll stops. And it's just a really kind of elegant pen. You know, and I don't have an extensive vintage collection. I do have a lot of different Lamys, but just kind of over the years, I've had this pen probably 6 years, and over time, it's become kind of like one of my more endearing pens. That it's just like it's an aspect. Like you look at me and you wouldn't think like this guy's carrying a Golden Cow Lady pen around, but I actually really like it. So I don't know. Just goes to show that sometimes it's not like most of the other pens that I have. But you know, I just like it. I don't know. I have no other explanation for it other than it's just really grown on me, just because it's so unique. So there you go. Truth be told, I'm a pretty excitable person, and I probably end up genuinely liking way too many pens. So there's not really that many that I just like to start with. I'm not joking. I looked through my whole collection of 600 or whatever pens, and I was like, I don't really hate any of these. So I think it's kind of like, you know, all adopted children where it's like I love them all equally. So I'm not sure, but you know. know, I do love pens. What can I say? I suppose this would be a huge undertaking in all areas of your business, but would you consider taking pre-orders? I live in such a time zone that when you release new pens, I'm fast asleep, only to wake and receive the email notification, but the pen or ink has already sold out. That sucks, Knack, and I'm so sorry. I know that this is one thing that happens, especially to our overseas folks in Asia, Australia, other parts of Europe maybe, depends on how late we release things. We have gone away from releasing especially hot items in the morning, because then even on the West Coast in the US, they're kind of getting the shaft a little bit. So we tend to try to launch things in like the early afternoon, because then most people in Europe can get it kind of late at night. Most people in the US are already up and awake, but still we can't really do much about Asia and Australia because it's the complete like opposite side of the earth from us. And my team is only staffed during certain hours. We can't launch things at 3 o'clock in the morning here. It just kind of stinks, and I totally get that. So it would seem at first glance like a pre-order situation might help with that. The challenge is when we're out of something that sells within a couple of hours, like when we launch in the middle of the night, you wake up and it's already sold, that means there's such hot demand that we would sell out of pre-orders. So even if we allowed pre-orders on things, it would still sell out, except most people, it would sell out before they even kind of heard about it or would even have the opportunity to buy it. We did one pre-order once. This was for the original the second ever J-Bomb Rouge Hematite. The 1670 ink, the original red one, we got like 10 bottles or something in the first shipment we ever got. Second shipment we ever got, I think we like finagled our way to get 20 bottles. Like think about that, 20 bottles of ink for our entire world audience. Granted, our world audience was not that much to speak of back in 2010, but that's all we had was 20 bottles. So after the first shipment, it sold out immediately, and nobody knew who we were, and we were nobody, so it sold out. But still, it was hot. People were looking around for it, so we took pre-orders for the very second order. This was like our first few months in business. What happened is we actually oversold on pre-orders because we didn't know exactly how many bottles we were going to get. We just said, okay, we're going to have a running list, and we're going to go down the list. Technically, we didn't even take everybody's money, but we just said we have a running list, and we're going to guarantee you stock as long as we get what we get. So we got it, and I think we had a list of like 26 people or 27 people, somewhere along those lines. And then they told us, yep, you're getting 20 bottles. And so we had to go back to those 6 or 7 people and say, sorry, we know we told you that you were going to get it, but you weren't first in line, actually, so you're not going to get it. And then what happened is, so like the first or third person that we did, when it came time to pony up, they were waffling, and they didn't pay right away, and so it was just like we had to chase them down, and it was just like, come on, really? So people ended up being disappointed, all this kind of stuff. And then we never even listed it on our website. It all sold through email or whatever means that somebody had contacted us. And I was like, this is just a terrible way to do things because we're making everybody unhappy except for those few people that just happen to email us and just get lucky. I was like, this is really frustrating, an entirely manual process. We just can't function this way as we grow. So that was the first and last time that we ever did that. And I'm glad it's that way, frankly, even though it totally stinks for people in your situation. And I recognize that. For us to do it any other way at this point with such unreliable stock, there's just no way that we can manage it well. Now, there could be an opportunity for something like a VIPs club or some sort of, loyalty program, or we could charge a premium to do that. I don't know, it's not going to sit well for most people, but we could theoretically charge a premium to curb demand to be able to do a pre-order situation. I don't know, there's a lot of different ways it could possibly be done, or it could be a lottery type situation. I know I've seen that with like hot shoes when they're selling, like, if there's a local store and they're getting 100 pairs of shoes, they're going to sell for like $1,000 afterward, but they have to sell it at $150 or whatever the case may be. So they do a lottery to keep the drama down. So it's like you show up within a certain window, you put in your ticket or whatever, and then a lottery is given out, and those 100 people or whatever get the chance to buy the shoes first. So that could be another opportunity, but that's tough. That's really tough. So it's something that we're thinking and we talk about a lot here. But in the meantime, the fairest way that we need to do it is to be first come, first serve. Everybody gets email notification. It goes out at the same time. I know not everybody's on the same schedule, but at least then the notification goes out at the same time, and it's just kind of whoever shows up first and buys it. That's the thing. So, I'm really curious to kind of piggyback that. Not my question of the week, but my question of the question is, what have you guys ever seen? Not even pen companies necessarily, but just what have you seen other companies that have hot stock do to curb high demand or to manage high demand during product launches, whether it's like shoes or fashion, electronics, whatever. Specifically, if it's like an online scenario, I would love to hear what your positive experiences have been in that way that you feel is fair. And that's something that we could maybe consider. Part of the reason we moved our website is because there are a lot more opportunities for us to plug in apps and things like that. Our old site was very limited, and it was just like, we can only do this. But we may have some opportunities to get creative and do some custom development that could be interesting. So I'm curious about that. Why don't more fountain pen makers have stub nibs as part of their lineup? Sigh. I know, right? Like, I feel ya. Stub nibs. got a very special place in my heart. I think back, I get very nostalgic around the DC show. I know I'm bringing up DC show a lot. It just happens, very fresh on my mind. But I think a lot about like, man, what it was like for me to be a newbie, because I was a total newbie. That was my first just drop into the ocean of fountain pen experience. I literally never even touched a fountain pen before. I went to that show and it blew my mind. So whenever the DC show rolls around, it throws me right back into being a complete and total noob. And I remember that very, very, very fresh in my mind. So the reason stub nibs kind of come up in that thought process in my mind is because that was some of the first nibs that I was really drawn to was stub nibs, because for me, I did not have great handwriting starting out. I still don't think my handwriting's that great. It's got a little better, but it's not amazing. For me, the stub nib just like leapfrogged me into like a whole other category of what I thought was my own handwriting quality, visual appeal. And part of that is just the nature of a stub nib. It kind of makes it look more scripty, more calligraphic than a round nib, at least in my mind. I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. So for me, I'm like, yeah, stub nibs are awesome, but I experience kind of the same thing. Like stub nibs are not a standard nib offering on every single pen. I don't necessarily 100% know why that is, because it's going to be different for every manufacturer. The one thing I can say is that it's my understanding from talking to manufacturers that are from other countries outside of the U.S. Obviously, the U.S. market is where most of my influence comes from, because that's mainly who we serve with our customer base. But we also interact socially with people all over the world, and most of our manufacturers are outside the U.S. So it's interesting to get kind of perspective on that. From what I understand, stub nibs are not necessarily the hottest demand thing. It's like even in the U.S., it's changed a little bit, but like the medium nib for a long time was like the most popular nib. And to me, I'm just like, I got nothing wrong with the medium nib, but that is just not what I would say is like the go-to most popular nib size. And it does not typically prove to be the most popular nib size for us at Goulet. Usually extra fines, and or as fine as possible, because we have pretty terrible paper as a general rule in the U.S. because we typically have inkjet printers and things like that, or people using pencils or ballpoints. And so high quality paper is usually not the standard at most places that we're interacting in the U.S. So having a finer nib is usually the most popular nib size, if all else equal. And then a stub is usually like number 2 for us here at Goulet. Now, it's not the case for every pen necessarily, but that's usually kind of how it goes. And the manufacturers are usually pretty surprised to hear that. And we end up being somewhat of an anomaly. Maybe not just Goulet, with our kind of, whatever the demand that we have with our community, but it might be somewhat more even of a U.S. thing than outside the U.S. So I think that's, and I think part of that maybe has to do with the handwriting style. Part of that has to do with, maybe just the novelty factor. Maybe it's because, it looks kind of more scripty and stuff like that. Or
Diese
it's a way to
Prüfung
step up
mache
your
ich
handwriting a
nicht
little
noch
bit. And
einmal.
you kept up with handwriting in a long time. It's certainly other cultures, the ones where fountain pens are coming from, Germany, France, Japan, Italy, things like that. There's more of an emphasis on handwriting in the culture, and kids in school are taught more handwriting and even use fountain pens in their schooling. That hasn't been the standard in the U.S. in a long time, even though historically handwriting was very important in the U.S., especially around the turn of the 20th century and all that, when you had Spencerian and Palmer and all that, who were huge influences, not just in handwriting, but kind of in society and morality in general. Like there was a huge effort to push the quality of handwriting with morality and stuff like that. And take that for what it is. That was kind of a historical thing, but I think that some of the appeal of having these stub nibs is maybe a little bit of a harkening back to those times when really nice handwriting was kind of a status thing almost. So I don't know if that's necessarily the same thing in other cultures, or maybe like you can have nice handwriting without having to throw a calligraphic looking nib on it. But maybe that's kind of like a little life hack for us in the U.S. At least that's how I found it to be when I first started out in fountain pen. So for me, it was almost kind of a surprise that there weren't as many stub nibs available on everything. So this is just kind of casual ramblings that I'm having, not meant to make any. I'm certainly not super